Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Last week, John Della Rose made a video talking about how DC's new event, Absolute Power, is not performing well as related to pre-orders at comic shops. And I was pondering making my own video to discuss why this comic is performing so poorly as related to pre-orders at comic shops to give my perspective as a publisher, but I quickly changed my mind because I realized that saying anything about DC Comics isn't going to help anything at this point, and personally I had just charged DC Comics to the game as far back as 2011. So when I look at DC Comics, it's just in a very sad state where we're heading towards rock bottom, and the Absolute Power event shows how far DC has fallen as a brand. Now, I have been a fan of DC Comics ever since I was about 4 years old, and I was looking at the comics in my brother's collection, not to mention watching the Super Friends show on ABC and on Channel 11 in syndication. And as a fan of DC Comics back then, I was really excited about those characters as a kid, but as a 50-year-old man, I have nothing but indifference for DC Comics because the DC that's currently out right now basically are not the characters I grew up with due to the dysfunctional plans of Dan Didio and Warner Brothers to go out here and try to reach new readers with the New 52. And when they decided to end the classic DC universe, that basically ended my whole interest in DC characters overall. And as a publisher, when I look at DC Comics at this point, basically, again, I'm not looking at it from a fan perspective, but as a publisher on the outside, objectively looking at this company, and this company basically is failing because their creators and editors can't answer a critical question, and that critical question is, why should we care? I mean, this is the question I have to answer before I put fingers to the keyboard to write a story or to contact artists to create covers for those books. I have to answer that critical question, and when it comes to the whole event of Absolute Power, it's an absolute mess because that question of why should we care is not answered as related to this event, which revolves around Brainiac and Amanda Waller, and having Amanda Waller as your lead villain is not a selling point for any comic event. I mean, when it comes to comics, comics are a visual medium, and as a visual medium, you're supposed to be presenting characters that can get our attention and get us excited, like in the case of 1986's Legends. Now, 1986 or 1987's Legends, I really can't remember the year when it came out. You had John Byrne with fantastic art, and you had great dynamic visuals with villains like Darkseid and his Elite being the lead villains. And then you had on the side of the heroes Superman, Batman, and the Flash, and all these other characters which were very colorful and dynamic. And everything as related to this event, which built on the Crisis of Infinite Earths, restarting the new DC universe and the formation of the Justice League, there was a lot of excitement as related to this event because there were reasons to care about heroes and why these heroes in the DC universe were important. But we don't get that as related to the case of Absolute Power, which decides to take us down the dark road of dysfunctional storytelling that was established by people like Dan Didio, who ran DC Comics into the ground when he started in 2002, and follows the dark story model of writers like Mark Millar as related to Civil War in giving us a cut and pasted version of, oh, the heroes are losing their powers, something we've already seen with stories like The Extinction Agenda that came out in the X-Men. Not to mention, this storyline has been done to death as related to DC Comics on an Elseworld called JLA Act of God, and also gives us elements of the Marvel storyline Civil War. So we've seen this whole storyline done before of a government official looking to oppress superheroes and look to show how they have all the power. Again, this has been done to death and done far better in storylines like Extinction Agenda, JLA Act of God, and Civil War. And at this point, there's no real reason to care about Absolute Power because it's an absolute mess of a story, and it's an absolute mess of a story that no one is getting excited about, and no one's getting excited about it because at this point, who wants to see an obese middle-aged woman going out here and talking about how she's oppressing superheroes? That's not really something exciting for anybody to care about. And when I look at this whole situation with Absolute Power, this event is really doing badly for two reasons. One reason it's doing bad as related to pre-orders is because the storyline isn't very exciting. That's one reason why the storyline is doing poorly. And the second reason why the storyline is not really getting pre-orders is because there are not that many comic shops left in this country. Now, at this point in the United States, there's less than about 500 comic shops. So that's another reason why we have the low pre-orders. I mean, there's not that many comic shops left anymore. And the reason why we only have less than 500 comic shops in this country is because of the incompetent editorial that currently is running DC Comics and is hitting rock bottom, because at this point people just have no reason to care about DC Comics when they publish garbage like Absolute Power, and the DC Universe isn't the same continuity that many of us older comic fans grew up with. I mean, the damage has been done as related to Dan Didio coming into DC Comics back in 2002, and when he came into DC Comics in 2002, he decided to take DC off a direction because DC was doing exceptionally well. Even with the collapse of the comic book industry in the 90s, DC was consistently doing very well, but Dan Didio decided to take us down the road of edgelord story models, and those edgelord story models basically alienated DC customers who were used to seeing DC's heroes as paragons of people, and instead of us seeing paragons, we started to see these characters head down the road of the grim and gritty characters as related to the model established by Watchmen. And as Dan Didio took us down the road of the deconstructed story model, he basically tore down the structure of DC Comics to the point where books that were selling 200,000 back in 2001, like Robin and Nightwing, basically got canceled, and other books basically wound up going from 200,000 to basically down to 50,000, all due to his mismanagement. And on top, and the whole thing is, after he mismanaged the original DC Universe, he and Warner Brothers wanted to go out here and try to go on a thing to create a new DC Universe. And as they created the New 52, instead of sales rising, sales continued to fall. And DC and Warner Brothers, as they scrambled to try to save DC Comics, went and tried to take things back with the Convergence and the Rebirth. But then Dan Didio then came in and did more damage to DC Comics by trying to push the dark deconstructed model. And this is where DC Comics is right now after he got terminated, when Warner Brothers lost so much money that they had to wind up firing people in mass layoffs. And DC Comics right now basically is in free fall and is almost about to hit rock bottom. Now, John Della Rose had in his video talking about how DC Comics, they're looking to end the publishing division, but I don't believe as a publisher they're going to do that, because they're looking to mine these characters as related to licensing and merchandising. And the cheapest way to keep the trademarks for those characters is to keep those characters in print. Even if the comics lose money, they'll keep DC Comics around. Now, it would be a bit more profitable to possibly end the publishing division of DC Comics and outsource those characters to another licensed publishing division that Warner Brothers, currently owns, because Warner Brothers owns multiple publishing divisions, and it would be a lot cheaper for them to go out and basically outsource that to one of their imprints, like one of these other imprints that they own, and have them publish a book featuring DC characters. But that could be one way to deal with DC, but DC has been in a situation of dire straits ever since about 2002, and with the Absolute Power event, we see them nearing rock bottom as related to the DC Comics brand, because the problem is that they can't hire writers like myself, because we're not going to work on a work-for-hire basis, and we're not going to work at a work-for-hire basis because those jobs basically are paying you, again, just rates lower than minimum wage. They basically are paying you maybe $110 a page, and again, at 22 pages, that's only $2,200 or $2,500. It's not that much money when you consider you have to live in a place like New York where the rent is $3,000. And most folks, they cannot get the good writers to pay the good page rates, because these comic publishers don't want to pay the good writers the good money. And that's where comics are right now. They're in a place where they're about to hit rock bottom. And that's what I see happening with DC Comics, and that's why we're getting crap stories like Absolute Power, which basically show me that the whole event model of storytelling is basically obsolete. It's been obsolete for a good 4 or 5 years now, because the event model, which started in the 1980s by Jim Shooter, was originally designed to get people's attention on mid-list and bottom-list books by having them cross over in a big event, and that usually led to a spike in sales for those books in the short term that would possibly lead to them getting new readers in the long term. But these days, the whole event model is just a disaster overall, and it's a disaster these days because many of the editors don't know how to execute an event to make it exciting, like we had back in the days of Legends, back in the days of X-Men storylines like Inferno and Extinction Agenda. No, we don't have that editorial oversight to have that vision to navigate those events to turn into blockbusters like the last one. I believe that was the biggest hit, which was Acts of Vengeance over at Marvel. We don't have that editorial vision to be able to navigate these events, and that's why these events don't really go out here and lift all the books up in terms of sales and get new readers for the mid-list and low and bottom list books. That's why we don't get that type of event that gets people excited to go to the comic shop, because we have bad editorial in place, and that bad editorial is basically like the captain of the Titanic looking to go down with the ship instead of coming up with a plan to fight to make this whole DC universe rise. But there's not much you can do because the continuity is so damaged, and so damaged structurally to the point that there's nothing else much they can do with DC Comics at this point. And again, this whole situation at DC was one that I was gonna make a video about, but then I just changed my mind because I had charged DC to the game like I did Star Wars and Marvel. And again, this whole Absolute Power event, again, a sad state of affairs as related to the absolute mess going on at DC Comics, and the reason why you don't see all these people getting excited to go out here and put in pre-orders, because there's nothing worth buying as related to this event. I mean, again, who wants to read a comic about an obese middle-aged black woman going out here and putting the hammer down on superheroes? That's not exciting at all. I mean, it's not like Justice League Star-Crossed, where we saw the heroes taken down by Hawkgirl and Thanagar. I mean, that's exciting, but this event, basically, again, obese, middle-aged black woman taking on superheroes, that's not exciting, and she's using the government to take them down. Again, that doesn't really go out here and make you want to spend money. It doesn't want to make you spend anything. And what's sad is that The Incredibles did this whole storyline as a subplot to the movie, the first Incredibles, and did it way better than what's being done was related to Absolute Power. And again, Absolute Power just shows you the absolute sad state of affairs that the comic book industry is in. An absolute sad state of affairs, because here we have editors thinking Amanda Waller is a good villain when she's not anybody interesting enough to get your attention. She's a good supporting character, but not as a lead villain. And again, the whole design for Brainiac is a mess, and you've got the female Brainiac, again, just complete hot garbage. And again, this is all building off a run of really bad Batman stories related to the Failsafe storyline. And again, DC they're thinking that they're wondering, why is this event failing? Well, everything as related to this event failing is just basically based on years of incompetence as related to Chip Zdarsky's bad Batman run, and related to DC's bad editorial and mismanagement of the DC universe. And when I look at Absolute Power, again, it's a disaster, and a disaster basically built on over 20 plus years of failure at DC, and may be the straw that breaks the camel's back as related to DC and its overall broken continuity, and may be the thing that leads to most people looking at DC and seeing it as the place of rock bottom, because this event basically takes us from the heights where DC was in the 70s when I was a kid, as considered to be some of the greatest superheroes in comics, to being a footnote in history where these heroes are going to have an ignominious end because of bad editorial, which has led to poor sales. Now, if you want to pick up my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic on Lulu.com right now in paperback by clicking the link in the description box, and you can get it for the same price as the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to try out some of my action-packed fantasy prose fiction on the SJS Direct universe, you can pick up the books of the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, Spellbound, The Legendary Mad Matilda and Spinsterella, and my sorority novel, The Thetas, my business novel, Recipe for Success, and my vampire novel, Eternal Night. You can find all of those books in paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com, and you can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to see me be able to make more videos about comics, science fiction, and fantasy, or help me to be able to make the next SJS Direct comic, or be able to buy independent comics from crowdfunding to be able to do comic reviews, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback at e-readers, ISIS, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get your copy of ISIS, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Illuminati. The man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this all-new action-packed John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes Illuminati in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.